Hello everyone, this is Iran Talk, and in this video I'd like to discuss the truth about Jason Raza Jorjani's relationship with his engaged fiancé Nassim Nouri. What you will see is that Jason Raza Jorjani's relationship with Nassim Nouri is one of those for me but not for thee. In other words, what you'll be able to see here is that Jorjani's relationship with Nassim Nouri is hypocritical. I will present evidence to substantiate this assertion. Now, without further ado, I'd like to begin this expose. To begin, here is an image of a young Jorjani, and what you can see is that this individual does not reflect his Nordic ideal for what he wants Iranians to be, and you can clearly see an Iranian mixed with some Semitic as well as Mongoloid traits. And this is very surprising considering that Jorjani has previously stated that the ancient Aryans who were responsible for Iran's great civilization and culture were Nordic Europeans. Therefore, Jorjani does not represent or even reflect the ideal that he has in his mind for modern day Iranians, especially his views on their ethnic and genetic origins. As evidence for Jorjani's hypocrisy, you can see that in his 2019 monograph Iranian Leviathan, Jorjani called the elites of ancient Iran, particularly from the Achaemenid, Parthian, and Sasanian periods, as Nordic Aryans. Furthermore, the assertion is also made that these Aryans only represented around 10% of Iran's population, of which 1% made up the true elites. In the same monograph, Jorjani went on to say that the Western Iranians who established the Median Kingdom and then the Persian Empire were simply domesticated versions of these ferocious Nordic progenitors. They were essentially the same people after long-term exposure to Elamite and Babylonian civilizations of the ancient Near East region that they migrated down into and eventually overran. And what's interesting is that in this passage, Jorjani also compared the Medians and the Persians to the Scythians, even though evidence suggests that the Scythians diverged from the ancestors of the ancient Medians and Persians in Central Asia even before their migration southwards. And to further highlight Jorjani's hypocrisy, he went on the alt-right.com, which is a far-right organization, and claimed that Rumi was white. So for this organization, he wrote an article and he also gave an interview. It is worth mentioning that by white, Jorjani meant Nordic. And I think this was well reflected in the last two passages that I shared. Now I will present evidence refuting these claims from Jorjani, but before I do, I just like to go through a series of images of Nassim Nouri and Jorjani. Here is the first of these images, and you can see that Nassim Nouri has very dark skin compared to Jorjani, and I would actually reckon that Jorjani also would have had darker skin if he wasn't half European. Moving on, here is just another image of Nassim Nouri, and you can see that she has a very Iranian phenotype and not a European or Nordic phenotype, and she also has darker skin than Jorjani, which is apparent once again. Up next, here is yet another image of the two, and once again you can see that Nassim is much darker than Jorjani. In fact, she's very much not the Nordic ideal that he wants for Iranians, especially those Iranians living within the country of Iran. And this is hypocrisy at its finest. Now here is an image of Nassim Nouri with pseudo-African features, so you can see that she has curly hair and darker skin compared to Jorjani. Now the image I presented is an excellent example of Jorjani's hypocrisy, and this is very much true once considering what he wrote for the alt-right.com in 2016. In this article titled Against Perennial Philosophy, Jorjani wrote, before the Arab, Turkic, and Mongol conquests of Iran, in other words, up to the end of the Sasanian period, the majority of Iranians were genetically identical to Europeans. In the same article, Jorjani went on to say that the Arab invasion as well as the Turco-Mongol invasions were very bad, and this led to the massacre of the indigenous Iranian population that deprived Iran of the genetic basis for the production of a Hegel, Nietzsche, or Heidegger. But what's interesting here is that he suggests that embryo technology should be used to restore the genetics of Iran from the pre-Arab, pre-Mongol past, and he believes that this population was a Nordic population. Please keep in mind that this was the same individual who was okay with dating this whatever she is, and this is rather unfortunate because Jorjani promotes a very Nordicist ideal for Iranians, whereas he's dating someone who is very far away from this ideal. That someone is Nassim Nouri. In fact, it could be very well true that Nassim Nouri had some sort of plastic surgery or facial alterations in the past. As you can see from this older picture, she had a very Mongoloid phenotype. What this means is that Nassim Nouri could be partially of Azeri or Turkic descent. Now here is another older image illustrating this reality, and once again you can see that this individual has a very Mongoloid phenotype. Overall, this image reflects Jorjani's double standards, and if you want to learn more about his psyche, please watch the video I've attached to the top right here on Jason's psyche. I feel that his mixed ancestry makes him want to compensate for one part of his heritage by imposing his strict standards on modern day Iranians, whereas he does not adhere to these standards himself. Up next, I'll be taking a look at the genetic origins of the ancient Iranians, particularly the Aryans of Central Asia, as well as the Sarmatians. The first of these relevant genetic studies was titled Genetic Continuity of Indo-Iranian Speakers Since the Iron Age in Southern Central Asia. The key takeaway of this study was that the ancient Indo-Iranian population from Central Asia that later contributed to the Persian and Median civilizations was on average 43% BMAC and 57% Andronovo. And this claim is critical to refuting Jorjani's lunacy, as he once claimed in Iranian Leviathan that the Aryans who migrated to Iran bypassed BMAC to a point west of it known as Hyrcania. In fact, there has been even studies done on the Hyrcanian people, and it was found that they also had significant indigenous Iranian farmer ancestry, and I discussed that in a video which has been linked to the top right here. Now, Jason's claimed that the Scythians and Sarmatians also had no BMAC ancestry, which is indigenous Iranian farmer ancestry, was refuted in a study that was published in Science Advances titled Ancient Genomic Time Transect from the Central Asian Steppe Unravels the History of the Scythians. What this study found was that the ancient Sarmatians required additional 15 to 20% Iranian ancestry and having less Bronze Age East Asian and more steppe ancestry than the Eastern Scythians. It's also worth mentioning that some Scythian groups had significant East Asian ancestry, whereas some had significant BMAC ancestry. Thus, professional genetic evidence once again refutes Jorjani. And here is the zoomed in version of the findings from the last image. So if you had trouble reading it because the last image also contained an admixture panel, you can read it here. On the matter of modern day Iranian genetic origins, I'll be breaking down most modern day Iranian populations with the exception of the Kurds, the Azerbaijanis, as well as the Bandaris and the Baluchis, and the reason for that is that those populations are a bit more admixed with foreign sources than the general Iranian population. For instance, the Kurds have more Caucasian ancestry, the Azerbaijanis have more Anatolian and East Asian ancestry, the Bandaris have a lot more South Asian as well as Sub-Saharan African ancestry, and finally, the Baluchis also have more South Asian ancestry. Thus, I feel that those outlying populations do not reflect the genetic makeup of the general Iranian population. Here are the source populations I will be using, and keep in mind that this is a Neolithic calculator, so most of these samples date to the Neolithic, though nonetheless there are a few from the Bronze Age and a few before the Neolithic, but the majority are from the Neolithic. Here are the results for modern day Iranian populations, and these are in stark contrast to the ludicrous claims made by Jorjani. You can clearly see that the modern day Iranians are on average 35.3% Neolithic Iranian, 19.6% Barcine late Neolithic, so this is Anatolian ancestry, 16.0% Lavan Neolithic, so not significant Levantine ancestry, 15.1% Yamnayan or Proto-Indo-European ancestry, 9.9% Caucasian hunter-gatherer ancestry, 2.8% Indus Valley ancestry, and 1.3% East Asian ancestry. And what's also apparent here is that modern Iranians have no sub-Saharan African ancestry, which is very interesting. Nonetheless, the key takeaway from these results is that modern Iranians have minimal foreign ancestry, and the Indus Valley ancestry is the largest component of their non-West Eurasian heritage, and it peaks in the Khorasani Iranian at 10.4%, and that's the highest, which is very interesting. And despite that, most modern Iranians do not have it as higher than 3.2%, which is quite interesting and remarkable. The populations who have more South Asian ancestry than this 3.2% benchmark are the Iranians from the east, including those from Khorasan, as well as the Laristanis from southern Iran, though they only have it at 4.6%, and finally, the Irani Zoroastrian community from India at 7.4%. Aside from this South Asian ancestry, you can see minimal East Asian ancestry, which does not exceed more than 2.8% in the Iranian Persian from Khorasan as well as the Iranian Persian from Tehran. So what these results indicate is that modern day Iranians have minimal East and South Asian related ancestry. What's also evident from these results is that modern day Iranians have minimal Levantine Neolithic ancestry, and that's quite interesting, and the levels are pretty much the same between the general Iranian population and the Iranian Zoroastrians. The last phase of this analysis will just take a look at Jorjani's transgenderism and actually will serve as a call to Nassim Nouri to reconsider her relationship with this mongrel. And yes, you heard that right, Jorjani is indeed a mongrel since he is half Iranian and half European. Now without further ado, I'd like to get into the final phase of this analysis. Jorjani first wrote about his transgenderism in his monograph titled Uberman. This monograph basically followed the life of Dana Avalon, a future female reincarnation of Jason Reza Jorjani. And as many of you may know, I actually exposed Jorjani's transgenderism in a video where I shared leaked conversations that he had with a friend of mine admitting that he wants to be born in another life as a woman. I've attached that video to the top right. Nonetheless, if you read Uberman, you'll know that Jorjani is indeed a transgender. After Uberman, Jorjani published Psychotron, which was just another one of his books, and again he portrayed himself as a woman through the character Dana Avalon. What's again evident from this cover is that you can see Jorjani is depicted as a woman. The most recent of Jorjani's transgender monographs was titled Aerosophia. This monograph followed the later life of Dana Avalon. And this is very interesting considering that Jorjani admitted to a friend of mine that he's always been into older women. Thus, Jason Reza Jorjani is indeed a dysgenic individual. And I think that Nassim Nouri should reconsider her relationship with him. In fact, Jorjani is such a dysgenic individual that he is not quiet about his transgenderism, publishing videos with his friend Selvin Griffith where he portrays himself as a woman and is depicted as a woman. For this reason, Jason Reza Jorjani should not be trusted at the head of any nationalist movement in Iran. And this transgenderism is not solely restricted to books or to YouTube, but it is also a part of his life. As you can see, here's a post from his Facebook and he is depicted as a woman and he created this himself. Moving on, here is yet another post, and mind you there were more, but these are the most interesting ones, and once again you can see that Jorjani has reimagined himself as a woman. And what's interesting to note for both of these images is that they're accompanied by a quote from his monograph Uberman. Thus, Jorjani is indeed a dysgenic transgender who does not deserve to be the head of any Iranian nationalist movement and should be disregarded by the majority of Iranian nationalists. His transgenderism alongside his ludicrous genetic theory should be more than enough reasons for Nassim Nouri to abandon him. To conclude, this analysis exposed the reality behind Jason Reza Jorjani's hypocrisy, particularly his relationship with Nassim Nouri. Nassim should indeed reconsider this relationship, especially considering the fact that Jorjani hates Iranians and has promoted ludicrous genetic theories that make no sense based on the genetic evidence, and also that by dating her he's a hypocrite as she does not embody the Nordic ideal Jorjani has set out for Iranians. Furthermore, Jorjani is also a transgender, and this goes against the nationalist ambitions of most Iranians, and I think that if Nassim realizes how bad this is, she would stop dating him. Thus, Nassim Nouri should re-evaluate her relationship with Jason Reza Jorjani, particularly where it concerns his dysgenic behavior. Now for the future, I'll be making more videos on Jorjani and his family members. The next one will be on his father, Feridun Qajar Jorjani. So please do look forward to that analysis as well. And for those of you who don't know, I released a video on Jorjani's family which is titled The Truth About the Jorjani Family in 2022. I've linked it to the top right and please take a look at it when and if you can. That's essentially it for this analysis. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.